Don Mclain Gill is a geopolitical analyst joining us. We also have with us Abhijit Iyer Mitra, Senior Fellow of the IPCS. Dr. Anand Ranganathan continues to be with us. Let me come to you first, Don. Don, very important information coming in terms of the sentiment in the summit being very positive. Of course, the Prime Minister playing a very important role here in terms of not just leading this, but also the fact that this convergence is not a divisive consensus, but certainly all countries coming together and unanimously adopting this New Delhi declaration, quite unlike what we saw last year in Bali.
Right, thank you so much. And this year's G20 gives you a glimpse of how India's rise will continue to look like beyond the rhetoric. You know, despite the global pessimists earlier on, the success of the consensus for the joint statement at a time of great geopolitical polarization is reflected by this year's theme. You know, what it stands for, Vasudev Kutumbakam. And in families, you know, disagreements happen. Thus, in a family, of course, एक inclusive माहौल समझौता के लिए ज़रूरी है और इस माहौल बनाने के लिए हमेशा एक influential, respected or practical member आवश्यकता है, you know. So this is where Indian success, Indian diplomacy success comes in. India does not only have the material capabilities and the political will to play a large leadership and diplomatic role, but it has also gained the respect and appreciation from different regions to push forward with its inclusive developmental initiative, security initiative, and peace initiative. So, you know, thanks to India's inclusive perception of international affairs, we now have the African Union part of G20, the G21 now, with a great representation of the Global South. Dignitaries such as the Indonesian ambassador also recognize that this G20 has become centered on grassroots issues, women empowerment, and also other grassroots issues of socioeconomic welfare. A mega rail and port connectivity project was also initiated for inclusive development. So with what has occurred on the first day, we could definitely say that everything has been consistent with India's vision of the world affairs and international political economy.
Right. Let me take this across to Abhijit Iyer Mitra. Abhijit, I heard you say yesterday that this is perhaps low-hanging fruit. There are all kinds of declarations, and perhaps achieving this is not only, of course, something post-Bali, where, of course, all countries have articulated their views vis-a-vis the Russia-Ukraine war, but also the fact that, you know, there are several positives. Of course, we have discussed how, of course, that nameplate or that country name of Bharat was re-emphasized there, the Bharat Mandapam. There's also, of course, the important fact that there's the Delhi Declaration, and also a clear message to China going out in terms of the economic corridor that's been announced as far as Europe, US, etc. are concerned. So a lot that's been achieved, in fact, over the last 48 hours in this particular summit. Abhijit.
Look, the tangibles are enormous. Like I told you yesterday, Madhav, the declaration itself is usually not the biggest thing in a conference like this. Declarations have come, declarations have gone, and they've amounted to nothing much. What we've seen different here is the three other tangibles that we've seen. The first the most important, of course, is the economic corridor. Now, we still have no clarity on how it's going to be operationalized, what the economies of scale and things like that are, because once you look at it on a map, it doesn't make sense. And yet none of these leaders would have just come up with something out of the hat like that without having some deep knowledge of what was going on. The second was the biofuel alliance. Let's not forget that. I'm against biofuels. I just want to put that on the record. But the fact is they've achieved some kind of a biofuel movement. I presume largely to challenge China's grip on the EV, on the battery market specifically. There are, of course, several producers of batteries. The problem is China has a certain, overwhelming lead in batteries, number one, and number two, in terms of the rare earths that are required to fuel a lot of the economy. So there's been a lot more in terms of tangibles that have come out of this particular summit than most other G20 summits we've seen before.
Well, absolutely. And let me take this across to Anand. Anand, one thing that is very clear is the fact that if you could just lower the volume there, but very, very important is Prime Minister Modi being at the center stage, leading the country at this point of time. And many say that the role that India particularly has, when it comes to diplomacy, we have, of course, a relationship with Russia. We have a relationship with the EU as well as European countries in the US. And it's been a very, very difficult balancing act which India has managed to walk over the past year or so. And perhaps to that extent, this particular summit has just highlighted the role that India could potentially play in the future as well.
Good morning, Madhav, and good morning to my fellow panelists. No, absolutely, you're 100% correct. I think this is a tectonic shift in more ways than one, and I would even go on to say that it's possibly an inflection point. India is not yet flexing its muscle, but it's come to the high table. And if you permit me, I've just seen the name of one of the expert panelists there. So can I just say it's bye-bye American Pie and hello Indian Chhole Bhature. Don Mclain is there. But I mean, to come back to a couple of things that I'd like to talk upon specifically, because the other two panelists are experts in matters. They are experts, but especially in matters other than health and climate. And I have a reasonable amount of knowledge in those. And I've, in fact, in G20, since yesterday you would have seen, I was particularly interested in the declaration, what it says about climate and health particularly. So if I can give you the good news and the bad news together, just a couple of minutes. I think as far as the climate is concerned, I'm more than pleased with what has been written in the declaration. It has a clear imprint of Dr. Kant, having conversed with him on these matters before. And I think it's very good because finally the so-called global south is collectively flexing its muscle, at least on this climate issue, and it has coerced a lot of you can say concessions, that's possibly a negative connotation nowadays, from the West. Particularly because, as a developing country, we are also bearing a burden which is much more than what our share allows us to do. Specifically, let me quote one example. The greenhouse emissions per capita of United States are 20 tons. For India, it's 2 tons. And yet, we are the proud signatory to the Paris climate deal. America chickened out. So, we are doing what we can in our capacity as a developing nation that needs to grow.
Right.
The West has already grown on the basis of...
Anand, very sorry to interrupt you, but there's a tweet coming in from President Biden. I have to go across to that because President Biden has put out a statement. And in fact, let's quickly access that particular statement. Amita, there with us as far as this particular tweet is concerned, where he has lauded Prime Minister Modi's diplomacy. He's hailed the Delhi Declaration and said that it's proved that G20 can drive a global solution. Amita, over to you. Please quickly take us through that.
Good morning there. As far as President Biden is concerned, however, it was over a 16-hour flight, but he made sure that he will be meeting the Prime Minister upon his arrival. Of course, he's left the country now en route Hanoi in Vietnam. But this is a tweet, as you also mentioned, at a moment when the global economy is suffering from the overlapping shocks of the climate crisis, fragility and conflict. This year's summit proved that G20 can still drive solutions to our more pressing issues. And this is something that has also been highlighted by Dr. Ranganathan a short while back, as far as the focus that has been on the regional factors, and the consensus is something that really needs to be talked about as to how India managed to convince all of the countries to sign the Delhi Declaration.
Well, absolutely. And also there's a statement coming in from Ursula von der Leyen, who's of course the EU chair and of course president rather. And in fact, she has given a statement on the session 3 of the G20 One Future, which is very, very significant as well. In fact, I'm going to quickly read out from this particular statement that's been put out by Ursula von der Leyen. And in fact, if I can quickly get that on the screen as well. Amita, if you have the statement with you, could you quickly take us through this particular statement?
I'll just try to do that in the meantime. Yes.
Yes, absolutely. And in fact, let me try and access that particular statement as well. In fact, this is a speech that's been given. And in fact, she says that one thing seems clear, the future will be digital. We want to focus on AI and digital infrastructure as it's been described. AI has risks, but also offers tremendous opportunities. Crucial question is how to harness a rapidly changing technology. All right, we'll quickly access that particular statement. But let me go back to Don Mclain Gill. Don Mclain Gill, very, very important that we're seeing this kind of statement coming in from President Biden. He's en route Hanoi, as we all know, but in fact, lauding the role of New Delhi, lauding the role of Prime Minister Modi as far as diplomacy is concerned.
Right. We have to understand the India-US strategic partnership enjoys a closeness like never before. It is at its highest point, I'd like to argue. There is also the recognition from Washington that the partnership is not one between a powerful and a less powerful country, but a special relationship between two major powers that converge in maintaining the international rules-based order. While there may be disagreements in specific areas, the overarching trajectory remains positive, given the understanding of India's legitimate and people-centric position. While it is possible for these disagreements to sort of create small friction points within the partnership, even the United States realizes that the role of India as a stabilizing force is undeniable. And as India continues to rise, we can definitely say that India's role in a transitioning multipolar Asia will be crucial not only for the global north, but definitely for the global south, given India's own experience with its pluralistic, democratic, multicultural society. And it is, I believe, the most apt voice that could equally project the sentiments of an equally diverse global south and international system.
Right, Dr. Anand Ranganathan, before in fact you announce whether it's Chhole Bhature or Mysore Pak that's going to replace American Pie, let me quickly ask you this, that in 70 days we've seen President Biden and Prime Minister Modi meet for the second time. There is likely to be, of course, that Quad summit around the 26th of January is what we are told. And there are other multilateral fora where President Biden and Prime Minister Modi could be meeting later this year. We're told there could be at least possibly 2 occasions. Of course, the formal announcements haven't yet been made. But keeping that in mind, it's really interesting to see the kind of engagement that India and US are having at the highest level. And this is perhaps something that's been rather unprecedented.
No, absolutely. I think it's just brilliant, I would say. I think finally we've unshackled ourselves from this Nehruvian thought and philosophy that was plaguing Indo-US relationships for more than 50 years. And Abhijit knows much more than me about this. But the fact of the matter is that the Americans had actually suggested informally an offer for India to be a permanent member of the Security Council, and Nehru said, no, let China be. So, we've had so many mishaps, through the last 50, 60 years. Finally, we've kind of crossed that Rubicon, and it's very evident from, in fact, even the trade numbers. In 1999, Indo-US trade was $19 billion. Today, it is $170 billion. We've sent more than 200 American satellites into space. We have NASA in strong partnership with ISRO. There's so many other things. The Indian stock market, the US has invested 34% in it. So we are actually partners in much more ways than one. But if I can just, Madhav, take a couple of minutes to finish what I was saying about the good news regarding the climate thing, because I think that's also tied in, if I can do that.
Yeah, certainly. But there's a quick update coming in, Dr. Ranganathan. I'll come back to you. This is Harshvardhan Shringla, the chief coordinator of the G20. And in fact, he said that we've ensured that the Prime Minister's vision of an outcome-oriented presidency would be held, and it has been seen in every aspect of the way we've conducted the summit. We've achieved the objectives of the Global South. We've addressed the requirements and concerns of the Global South. And we're very happy that PM Modi announced the advent of the African Union as a permanent member of G20 under our presidency. Let's listen into this statement.
I think we have always maintained that, international governance bodies have to reflect the realities of the 21st century. And the African Union is a very important part of the global south that is underrepresented in global governance institutions. So it was incumbent on us under our presidency of the G20 to lend a voice to such an important part of the global south, that's the African Union. And we're very happy that, the Prime Minister announced the advent of the African Union as a permanent member of the G20 under our presidency.
Well, Harshvardhan Shringla, the former Foreign Secretary, and certainly as the G20 Chief Coordinator, playing a very, very important role in far as the summit's success is concerned. I'm going to come back to you, gentlemen, in just a quick moment. We're going to take a very quick break, and we'll be back with this discussion. And after the successful G20 summit, now the world leaders have started departing the national capital. We are seeing, of course, South African President Cyril Ramaphosa departing from India. And those are the visuals of his departure from the national capital. In fact, the South African Air Force aircraft, which he's boarding at the moment. And you can see those pictures coming in from the Parliament Technical Area in New Delhi, where, in fact, this process of the departure of the South African president is currently underway. Let me, in fact, take this across to Abhijit Iyer Mitra. Abhijit Iyer Mitra, of course, 48 hours have been quite eventful. There have been a number of declarations. And what has been very interesting is to see the role that India has played. Many talking about the potential role, of course, in the future. But in terms of what we were discussing a short while earlier, in terms of the engagement between India and the United States, and, of course, that particular relationship, particularly in context of what has happened with the African Union joining G20. It's going to become the G21 now, as we all know. That is very, very important, because that's a move that shows how India is for inclusiveness, particularly in terms of the African Union joining the G20. Abhijit.
Right. So, this has a lot to do with showing continuity in our foreign policy. And continuity is very important. A lot of people want clean breaks in foreign policy. That's never a good idea with foreign policy, because then you're perceived as capricious. Now, what's happened out here is, remember, we have a history of championing, developing countries, the poor countries, whatever you want to call them. And this is something China used to do once upon a time, and then it's kind of turned backflipped. Let me give you a simple example. China and India had a kind of a G2 alliance where we thought, at least till about 5-6 years back, that we were going to, collectively bargain with the West and get storage technology and access to markets, etc., to enable a cheaper transition to green energy to happen. China, of course, backstabbed us and signed that energy deal with, I think it was Obama, if I'm not mistaken, the green energy deal with Obama. And then Obama turned around and said, well, guess what? That deal was for China. It's not on the table for you anymore. So we've learned our lesson to not rely on China, but we do need collective bargaining. So this is very useful for us. On one hand, it's a continuity of our policy. On the other, it enables us the collective bargaining that we need for things like climate finance and climate change mitigation, etc., the technology transfers required, amongst a lot of other things. I'm emphasizing technology here because it's important for India. But remember, climate finance is equally important. The mitigation strategies are equally important. And this kind of helps us. It makes the entire bargaining process a lot easier.
All right. And in fact, let me bring in Don Mclain Gill on that. Don, very, very important to see how South Africa, not just South Africa, of course, the entire African Union is now part of the G20. It's been a pending demand, and India pushing it through. And there's a pattern to this, because even BRICS was expanded recently. A number of countries that have been included in BRICS. India was one of the countries that was, in fact, leading the demand for these platforms to be more inclusive and have better representation.
Right, and I completely agree with my respected co-panelists that there is definitely continuity in Indian foreign policy towards its vision for an inclusive, equitable, people-centric international system. And of course, the inclusion of the African Union under the G20 presidency of India is not only historic, but also represents, as I've mentioned earlier, what to expect in the years to come, especially as India continues to increase its material power and, of course, its influence. And, of course, major power politics has often been viewed with a very pessimistic lens, looking into it as an avenue for competition and zero-sum game. But as we can see, the perception of Indian foreign policy, along with its rise, continues to prioritize its own position in the international system as a responsible development and security partner beyond the Indian Ocean region. And we have been seeing this from the very beginning and up to now.
All right, Don, please stay with us. I'm going to request Abhijit and Dr. Ranganathan to also stay with us. We're going to slip into a quick break, but more news, more updates, all the breaking updates coming right here on Times Now. Stay tuned. Dr. Ranganathan, of course, this is something we've seen India being very concerned about. And perhaps at that bilateral meeting with Justin Trudeau as well, this is an issue that could potentially figure as what many have speculated. But what is, in fact, something that is very concerning is the fact that several of these individuals have had a free run. And they've had a free run to threaten violence even, which should rightly have no place in any democracy where there is rule of law.
No, absolutely. But first of all, can I please request you, Madhav, to never have Don as a panelist again? I mean, he just said he completely agrees with his fellow panelists. I mean, who does that? What's going on here?
Offer him some Mysore Pak, Dr. Ranganathan.
No,
if not American pie.
But let me very quickly in 10 seconds end on health, because I've been itching to say that, and then I'll come to the Khalistan issue if you don't mind.
Okay,
on
go ahead.
health, I'm largely disappointed. In fact, more disappointed than I was elated on climate, because if people were hankering for the mention of the word Russia, then why are those same people silent on the omission of the word China when it comes on health? They have devastated the world, its economy, its people, killed millions because of their direct responsibility. And then again, even in this declaration, the declaration says WHO will remain at the core. Really? It's Wuhan Health Organization. You want it to remain at the core and destroy the world further, so I'm disappointed on that account. Now, let me come to the Khalistan issue. You're absolutely right. UK and Canada must do much more than what they're doing right now on this issue. But then, if I was Rishi Sunak or Trudeau, well, thankfully he's not here, but if I was Rishi, I would have turned around and said, Mr. Modi, we are doing as much as what you are doing on the issue. Remember, it is in India that the biggest Khalistani quote-unquote terrorist was on the run for a month and we couldn't catch him. And ultimately he was caught inside a Gurdwara. His supporters ransacked and ran over a police station. This is not happening in UK, Madhav. This is not happening in Toronto. This is happening right here in the heart, in Punjab. So can we get our house right first before we castigate others?
Absolutely. In fact, Rishi Sunak, in fact, visited the Akshardham temple earlier today. Of course, Rishi Sunak is someone who has been very open and very clear about the fact that he is a Hindu. In fact, saying Jai Siya Ram, attending that particular discourse given by Murari Bapu earlier as well. But Abhijit, interesting to see Rishi Sunak, of course, visiting the Akshardham temple earlier this morning, but all eyes on really what has transpired as far as this particular bilateral meeting between PM Modi and Rishi Sunak is concerned, because there's a lot that the two countries have to discuss and potentially work together with as well.
So a lot of the things that Rishi Sunak would have been looking at would have been in parallel to do with the India-EU free trade agreement that is stuck. Remember, till Brexit happened, Britain was very happy to hide behind the EU negotiations and things like that. Now they realize that they're probably missing out on a large chunk, and they're looking for some kind of segue on how to go about doing this. There would have been talk of visas as well. Remember, the visa backlog is a huge issue. It does affect Indians. That would have been a second thing to talk about. The third would have, I guess, in a very rudimentary fashion, been talk of Ukraine and defense supplies and things like that. Not that Britain's a very big supplier of defense, but well, every little bit is important, and obviously Ukraine would have been discussed given how Britain's one of the biggest champions of Ukraine at the moment. But outside of that, I don't think there would have been anything particularly substantial in those conversations happening out there.
Okay, let me quickly bring in Don on this as well. Don, very, very interesting, because, you know, what we've seen today, what we've seen yesterday rather, as far as the Delhi Declaration is concerned, you know, many would say that is this now the era of the Ukraine-Russia war dominating diplomacy, dominating discourse, you know, now slowly starting to ebb, because this is something that many countries, particularly countries in the global south, have been very concerned about, given that all other issues seem to be, you know, sacrificed at the anvil of Russia-Ukraine war.
Right. Very important. We have to highlight two particular things on this matter. You know, since the beginning of the war between Russia and Ukraine, we can definitely see that countries in the developing world were already voicing their concerns and their worries of how this could eventually spill over and hamper and provoke their interest, particularly in development and security at a time when these countries have just begun to reel and try to alleviate the significant impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. And of course, as we have seen throughout the initial months, the increase in sanctions, for example, and the spillover of other strategic engagement in Eastern Europe had severe casualties for the countries in the developing world and even the least developed economies. And you know, the second part here is that with where we are entering right now, where we are facing some sort of a strategic stalemate between Russia and Ukraine, and of that of the West as well, there is a willingness of the West to redefine their role in the global South, given that the past few months have also garnered negative criticism about it, and of course the ambivalence of the developing world towards the West. So I think this also goes in line with the West's desire to paint a better picture towards their image in the international system.
Okay.
And this shows that, of course, that sort of compromise worked.
Okay, before we go close to Dr. Ranganathan, let's get a quick update from the IDPO complex where our reporters have been since early morning today. Rishabh is with us, Pragya also joining us. Rishabh, take us through what exactly is the status of the bilateral meetings, because that's going to be very important. We're going to be seeing the French President Macron having a working lunch with PM Modi, but there are also another set of bilaterals, about 12 of them if I'm not mistaken, that are all set to take place today. Take us through the quick update as to what are the bilaterals that have taken place and how many more we will see today.
Well, the bilaterals will begin post the first session, starting with the working lunch with President Macron. That would be the first one. As per government sources that have been confirmed to Times Now, there are 9 which are already in place for today. And then depending on the schedule of Prime Minister, we'll see if further more bilaterals can happen. What we know right now, that there will be a pull-aside meeting with Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. There will be bilateral meetings with AU chair and Cameroon's president as well. There is another bilateral that will happen with Brazil. There is another bilateral that will happen with EU and EC that we are confirmed about right now. So there are bilaterals, and all the pertinent issues will be picked up. Khalistan issue with Canada is something that everyone is right now eyeing on, that what exactly prime ministers will speak, because India time and again has been putting forward its concerns that how Canada is being used for anti-India extremist activities. So that is something that is definitely going to be picked up, is what sources are suggesting us at the Canada pull-aside meeting. But yes, France is the first bilateral that is over working lunch. In 45 minutes to 1 hour from now, we'll have that bilateral to begin.
And Pragya, we are also expected to hear from top world leaders. There are several press conferences that have been lined up, Brazil, Turkey, etc. Quickly take us through who are the world leaders who are going to be addressing all of these briefings today. Pragya, can you hear me? Pragya, if you can hear me, quickly take us through who are the world leaders who are going to be addressing the media today. We're going to be seeing several of them, in fact, addressing press conferences. Quickly take us through what we're expecting to see in the latter half of the day.
So basically, what we have got to know is that Turkish President Erdogan will hold a press conference today between 3 to 4 p.m. and also there is a Brazilian press conference as well. Russians will also be addressing a press conference. Yesterday we saw a German Chancellor addressing the conference. So all of them would be speaking to the media concerning the achievements that all the countries have achieved during this G20 presidency. They will obviously be speaking about India's role in ensuring what has been achieved during the New Delhi Declaration. They all are having praises about Prime Minister Narendra Modi as to how the consensus has been reached on it. Plus, they are also aware of the fact that according to the economic ties that policies that have been approved, they are also going to be benefited, and they will be telling in detail how they are going to be benefited by all of that. Plus, they will be addressing their specific issues, individual issues they might have raised during the closed-door meetings of the G20, and also answering questions that we may have for them, and how can they also contribute to it. So all of that will be, it's going to be a very hectic schedule will also, and we would be coming out with their perspective of how G20 went.
Okay.
We heard what our side had to say last evening. We were very happy that we had reached a consensus. Now it is their time to speak about the G20 presidency of India and what they think about that.
Pragya and Rishabh, stay with us. I'm going to request our guests as well to continue to be with us. We're going to continue to report, bring you more breaking news, more updates coming in from the aftermath in terms of the G20 summit that's going to draw to a close. In fact, just another 15 minutes or so. The third session, in fact, is going to end, and post that, of course, there will be reactions coming in from top world leaders. You'll be seeing all of that live right here on Times Now. Stay tuned.